Time for a quick, short update on progress. I'm working on got the bench in, as you can see right behind the vacuum. Bench is in. I haven't finished welding it completely, but it's at least where it's going to be. And I'm started working on the sides. You can see I'm putting some flotation between these ribs uprights, and actually there's a piece here. This was a hole right there for the live well, but I don't use the live well. It usually just wets my gear because I like to use it to store stuff, and if I bump the switch it comes on. So I put a piece of plate here and welded all around it completely. Hopefully it doesn't leak. And then on this side I came through, and where the hole was I just welded all around that. So it should tie it in together pretty well, and hopefully it won't leak unless I got a little pinhole or something somewhere. So then that goes back in there. And then there's room for one more piece in there like that. Gotta add a little more there. And then I have to put the sides on, which are this thing here. It goes in there like that. And then I'll put some rivet, where the holes are was where it was riveted before. I'll put those rivets back in there just to plug those holes, and then I'll come back and weld it in. And the console goes right there, and the live well goes right there and somewhere. And then I'll just keep going forward with it. I already did this other side. I'll just show you kind of what it looks like. So here is, I had a bunch of rivets in here. It had a few welds before that I cut out when I took it apart, and all the previous welds are broken, so I had to put rivets in here. And now that I'm putting this back together, I'm putting the rivets back in just to hold it in place while I weld it, and also just to plug those holes. Same here. This bench wasn't quite centered from Bass Pro, so I actually centered it a little bit better. You can see this is where the old rivet holes were, so this used to be over here, or actually the bench was more that way. And but I centered it better because the other side was just barely catching. Now it's perfect. All these rivets had popped, so I had put more in. So now that I've put it back together, I got some rivets in there. I did a couple little tack welds just to hold it, but I'll come back and probably just weld it solid, or just put a few stitch welds in up here. I'll probably just put more stitch welds in here. I don't think it needs to be welded solid. And of course behind it I have that 2 layers of foam. When I had to end up cutting this a little to make it fit, because when I shifted the bench and all the floor around just to make it actually straight and centered, none of this stuff fit back perfectly, so I had to cut it and do a few things. But yeah, just got all the rivets again. I put those back in just to plug those little holes. Then I'll come back trying to weld it. It's very hard welding this because every time I do, where the floor is between ribs, it really flexes down just from the heat, and I don't have a way to pull it up. So these rivets are helping a little, but it's still very difficult. That's why you see a lot of these crooked looking welds, because it started getting a gap as soon as it gets warm, and it's just been a pain. But I'll come back and add some more in there, and up here I'll probably add a few more. Then there's another piece that goes up there. Then out here goes the big shotgun bench. Okay, we're making progress. We will keep going. Okay, it's time for another interim update on the tracker. Maybe we'll start. You see I got the bench in here, and haven't decided exactly how much welding I'm gonna do. I did, put some welds in here These sides before were only riveted in, and of course all the rivets have popped, so I came back in and put some stitch welding in there. Same way down on the floor with this side. It's all, I put rivets back in where the holes were just to cover them up, and then stitch welded it. Got this console back in. It's a combination console with a live well. I took out all the live well stuff because I just don't use it, and when the flip accidentally, or someone accidentally flips the switch, it ends up soaking all the stuff I have in here, so just going to use this for storage. Gotta hook that back up, but there's the lid. And this was all, welded all this in. All this here, it's all welded. It's just welded solid. And of course, I didn't weld this hinge just so I can take that off if I need to or want to. This down here, again, was all just riveted to the floor. So I put some rivets back in there to hold it, and then did weld it. I did one solid weld just to keep stuff from getting up under there. Silt and mud and sand and whatever. And then I, did stitch welding all along here. And so this is, welded over here. One thing that's I'm going to do to improve it is, and this thing was like a rattle trap before because all the rivets had broken, and this whole console was just riveted in. So this just has a few rivets shot in this way. It's like only like 4 rivets holding that thing to the side of the boat up to the gunnel, so I don't like that. So what I'm going to do is come back and put this piece of angle in here. I'll cut it off, and then I'll weld this in here, and it'll be completely welded to the gunnel, which should eliminate it from ever coming loose again. I did finish cutting the insulation, so here's on the side going forward. Now this is like 2 layers of 1.5 inch thick insulation. Of course, it goes all the way to the back. Same over here. This side has 2 pieces of insulation behind it, and then again I stitch welded it all the way to the floor, and I stitch welded it to the side. And I got insulation here. Now I just need to put the bench back in. This is where the gun storage bench goes, right there. See, where is that thing? Oh, you can see it up there right in front of that little boat. That bench will go back in here. Then I put all the insulation up here. So up here in this front deck, I filled it with as much of this rigid insulation as I could get in there. And except for this piece, I somehow messed that up, and that little piece up there, I mostly put the aluminum side to the outside, so it'd always be touching aluminum, try to eliminate some of the corrosion that may occur. But I don't know if that's going to help or not. So I got it completely full of rigid insulation, and as I was building it up with the rigid foam insulation, I was pouring some of the pour foam in there just so I sealed every little gap. And now this stuff is just, you can walk on it. It is just completely packed with every air pocket filled. And then you can see it up in here. But, I lined the whole thing with plastic in case I ever need to dig this out. The foam won't be stuck to the aluminum. And then up here, I just shoved a couple pieces in. I didn't actually put foam all the way to the front. I don't know if you can see that in there, but that's where the eye bolt is, or the latch for the front. Let's see if I can pull this out of there. All that stuff. That's where the eye is. It goes out the front, so I wanted to be able to access that if I needed to replace that in the future. But it is completely solid up here. And I just poured this foam anywhere it bubbled up a little too high. I just cut it off. I just used a fillet knife, just like you're filleting a fish, and just cut it off. This side over here is completely filled with foam. I ended up, before, this part just had a small plastic box. You can see it right over there by the shotgun bench. There's that little plastic box, and that was all the storage that was up here. So I ended up getting that out of here, and I reframed it. So I got a piece of siding here and just did all this framing. So I'll put a floor in there, and then below the floor I got it completely filled with rigid foam insulation. This is pretty stout, so this will give me a lot more storage. I do need to get, you can see where I just kind of riveted in that end piece there, and then I'll put a couple pieces here on the floor. It's not going to be a watertight, but it'll be, for the most part, dry. This was the last piece I used up. I actually got 7 sheets of rigid foam insulation, 4x8 sheets that are 1.5 inches, so that turns out to be exactly 28 cubic feet of rigid foam. And then I got about 4 feet of pour foam in there. Accounting for, I put in 5 feet, but accounting for some of this stuff I'm gonna have to slice off. This I just dumped the rest I had in there. So after I dumped it in there to fill in what I didn't have enough foam for, rigid foam for, it just kind of bubbled up. So again, I'll just slice that off, no big deal. And then this deck will be ready to put the decking back on and the hatch for this storage. And then, you know, got to put this siding on here. This will just, as you know, that just goes up in there, and I'll weld that in. I think my fitting's a little bit off after I moved things around and stuff shifted a bit. I'll have to cut this just a little, make it fit. But that's really about it, making good progress. Patched this just with a little thin sheet of aluminum. This was all, it didn't need to hold anything, but this gun locker or gun bench had places, 3 rod holders where you could, if the gun bench, I don't know how long it is, maybe about 5 feet wide, but you could slide the tip of your rod way up in the deck, which is pretty common in these type of boats, but I don't use this for fishing and never put a rod in there to start with. So I just cut that off and made it where I could fill it with foam. Okay, continuing progress.